Imagine waking up before sunrise to the sound of someone pounding violently on your door. You open it, expecting a neighbor or a traveler in need, but instead, heavily armed royal soldiers stand before you carrying the official seal of the King of France. They ask no questions. They do not explain. Within moments, iron chains are locked around your wrists, and you're marched into the darkness. By the time the sun rises, hundreds of your brothers have vanished, your castles have been seized, your churches have been sealed, your wealth has disappeared. Overnight, the men once celebrated as heroes of Christendom have become the most wanted enemies in Europe. How could an organization trusted by kings, protected by the Pope, and admired across the Christian world become the target of one of history's greatest betrayals in a single day? The answer begins with one unforgettable date: October 13, 1307. Before sunrise, the streets of Paris were unusually quiet. No church bells rang, no merchants opened their shops, and no pilgrims filled the narrow stone roads. Instead, thousands of royal soldiers silently through the darkness, each carrying the same sealed order. They were not preparing to invade a foreign kingdom or defend France from an enemy. Their mission was far more shocking. They had come to arrest the most powerful brotherhood in Christian Europe, the Knights Templar. Within only a few hours, hundreds of Templar commanders were dragged from their beds. Their castles were seized, their churches were locked, their wealth was confiscated, and countless treasures disappeared without a trace. The men who had once been celebrated as fearless defenders of Christianity were suddenly declared heretics, traitors, and enemies of God. It was one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in medieval history. But why would a king destroy the very order that had protected Europe for nearly 2 centuries? Was it simply greed? Was it political ambition? Or had the Knights Templar uncovered a secret so dangerous that powerful rulers decided history itself had to be rewritten? More than 700 years later, historians are still searching for the truth behind one of history's greatest mysteries. To understand how one of the most respected organizations in medieval Europe fell in a single night, we must travel back more than 200 years to an age when Europe was consumed by religious devotion, endless warfare, and an impossible dream that would forever change the course of history. The year was 1095. Western Europe was a continent divided by feudal conflicts, widespread poverty, deadly disease, and unwavering faith. For millions of Christians, there was no place more sacred than Jerusalem, the city where they believed Jesus Christ had lived, preached, died, and risen again. Yet Jerusalem remained under Muslim rule, and for generations, Christian pilgrims had risked everything to visit the holy city. The journey stretched thousands of dangerous miles across mountains, deserts, and hostile territories. Many travelers never returned. Some were robbed by bandits, others died from disease, and entire groups vanished without explanation. The pilgrimage itself became a test of both faith and survival. Then, everything changed. In November 1095, Pope Urban II stood before a massive crowd at the Council of Clermont. His speech would become one of the most influential moments in medieval history. He called upon Christian Europe to unite and reclaim Jerusalem. Those willing to take up the cross, he declared, would receive forgiveness of their sins and the promise of eternal salvation. His words ignited a wave of religious passion unlike anything Europe had ever witnessed. Across the continent, thousands of knights, nobles, priests, and ordinary farmers answered his call. Men stitched red crosses onto their clothing, families sold their possessions to finance the journey, and entire villages watched fathers and sons march eastward toward lands they had never seen. They believed they were embarking on a holy mission that would secure their place in heaven. But none of them realized that these events would also lay the foundation for one of the most powerful, wealthy, and mysterious organizations the medieval world would ever know, the Knights Templar. When the First Crusade ended in 1099, Christian armies succeeded in capturing Jerusalem after years of brutal warfare. For many across Europe, it was celebrated as a miraculous victory. The Holy City had finally returned to Christian control, and thousands of pilgrims began making the dangerous journey to visit the sacred places connected to the life of Jesus Christ. But while Jerusalem had been conquered, the roads leading to it remained deadly. Pilgrims were regularly ambushed by armed bandits hiding in the hills and forests surrounding the city. Many were robbed of everything they owned, while others simply disappeared, their bodies never found. For those who survived, reaching Jerusalem was only half the battle. Returning home alive was often even more difficult. Amid this growing crisis, a French knight named Hugh de Payens believed something had to change. Around 1119, he gathered just 8 other knights, creating a brotherhood of only 9 men. They possessed no great wealth, commanded no armies, and owned no castles. Their mission appeared remarkably simple: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling through the Holy Land. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem admired their dedication and granted them a headquarters unlike any other. They were given quarters on the Temple Mount, inside a wing of the royal palace built upon the site, believed to be the ancient Temple of Solomon. That single decision would shape history forever. From that moment, the small brotherhood became known as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Over time, the world would remember them by a much shorter name: the Knights Templar. Officially, they lived as humble warrior monks, taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their white mantles symbolized purity, while the red cross represented their willingness to die for their faith. They owned almost nothing as individuals, sharing every possession equally within the order. Yet despite their vows of poverty, something about their new headquarters puzzled historians for centuries. The Temple Mount was one of the most sacred and mysterious places on earth. According to biblical tradition, it had once been the location of King Solomon's temple, a place surrounded by centuries of legends about hidden chambers, sacred relics, and unimaginable treasures. Ancient texts spoke of the Ark of the Covenant, the legendary chest said to contain the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. Others whispered about forgotten scrolls, priceless artifacts, and knowledge lost to history. No one knows exactly what the 9 knights did during their first years beneath the Temple Mount. Strangely, historical records describe very few military missions during this period. Instead, many researchers believe they spent years exploring underground tunnels beneath the ancient foundations. Whether they discovered anything remains one of history's greatest mysteries. No documents describe what, if anything, was found beneath the temple. Yet after nearly a decade of silence, something extraordinary happened. The once obscure brotherhood suddenly began attracting the attention of Europe's most powerful nobles. Wealthy families donated land, castles, horses, and vast fortunes to support them. Influential church leaders openly endorsed their mission, and new recruits arrived from across the continent, eager to join the mysterious order. It was as though the world had suddenly realized that these 9 unknown knights were destined to become something far greater than simple protectors of pilgrims. But if they truly uncovered a secret beneath Solomon's temple, what exactly was it? And why would that secret eventually make kings fear the very men they once admired? Those answers would transform the Knights Templar from humble guardians into the most powerful organization medieval Europe had ever seen. The Knights Templar had begun as only 9 humble knights sworn to protect Christian pilgrims. Yet within just a few decades, their reputation spread across Europe with astonishing speed. Kings admired them, nobles respected them, and the church placed its complete trust in their loyalty. They were no longer seen as ordinary soldiers. They had become something entirely new, a brotherhood where the discipline of a monk met the courage of a battlefield warrior. Life inside the order was unlike anything most medieval knights had ever experienced. Every Templar followed a strict code known as the Latin Rule, a detailed set of regulations approved by the Church in 1129. Their day began before sunrise with prayer, followed by military training, maintenance of weapons, and long hours of discipline. They ate simple meals together in silence while passages from the Bible were read aloud. Personal wealth was forbidden. No knight owned private property, expensive jewelry, or luxurious clothing. Every horse, every sword, every piece of armor belonged to the order itself. Unlike many noble warriors of the Middle Ages, a Templar was expected to live with humility. His white mantle symbolized purity, while the red cross, stitched across his chest, reminded him that he had already accepted death for his faith. To retreat in battle without direct orders was considered one of the greatest acts of dishonor. If the Templar banner remained standing, every knight was expected to fight beside it, even when defeat seemed certain. This unwavering discipline soon made the Templars legendary on the battlefield. During the Crusades, they earned a reputation for charging directly into enemy lines with remarkable courage. Muslim chroniclers and Christian historians alike described them as fearless opponents who rarely surrendered. Their heavy cavalry charges often broke enemy formations, while their strict organization allowed them to fight as a single coordinated force rather than as individual warriors seeking personal glory. But military victories alone could not explain their rapid rise to power. As the years passed, donations poured in from every corner of Europe. Wealthy nobles gave them castles, fertile farmland, vineyards, mills, and entire villages. Kings granted them special privileges, believing every gift strengthened the defense of the Holy Land. Before long, the Templars controlled hundreds of estates stretching from England and Scotland to Spain, France, Italy, Germany, and the Crusader kingdoms of the Middle East. Their network became one of the largest organizations in medieval Europe. Every castle served as a military base, a place of worship, and a center for managing land and resources. Travelers could move safely between Templar properties across thousands of miles, protected by the authority and reputation of the order. Few institutions possessed such reach, and even fewer inspired such trust. Then something remarkable happened. Pilgrims preparing to travel to Jerusalem faced a constant threat from thieves. Carrying bags of gold across Europe was extremely dangerous. If bandits attacked, years of savings could vanish in a single afternoon. The Templars recognized this problem and developed an idea that would quietly change the world's financial system forever. A traveler could deposit money at one Templar commandery in France and receive a written document confirming the amount. Months later, after reaching Jerusalem, he could present that document at another Templar fortress and withdraw the same funds. He no longer needed to carry heavy bags of gold across dangerous roads. Today this idea seems ordinary, but in the 12th century it was revolutionary. Without realizing it, the Knights Templar had created one of the earliest forms of international banking. Merchants quickly noticed, kings noticed, and before long, the wealth of the Knights Templar would become almost impossible to measure. Their treasure grew larger every year, their influence reached every royal court, and soon, even the kings who depended on them would begin to fear them. By the middle of the 13th century, the Knights Templar were no longer just soldiers or monks. They had become bankers, landowners, diplomats, and one of the richest organizations in Europe. But with immense wealth came powerful enemies. One king, buried beneath overwhelming debt, was about to make a decision that would destroy the order forever. His name was Philip IV of France. By the middle of the 12th century, the Knights Templar had evolved into something the medieval world had never seen before. They were still warriors, still monks, and still protectors of Christian pilgrims, but behind the walls of their castles, another transformation was taking place. Quietly, almost unnoticed, the order was building an economic empire that stretched across Europe and the Holy Land. Their commanderies became far more than military outposts. They managed farms, vineyards, mills, workshops, and vast estates donated by kings, nobles, and wealthy families. Every harvest, every tax, and every donation strengthened the order's financial power. Before long, the Templars controlled thousands of acres of productive land and operated one of the largest administrative networks in medieval Europe. But their greatest innovation was something far more revolutionary than land ownership. As trade expanded across Europe, merchants and pilgrims faced a dangerous problem. Carrying large amounts of gold or silver over long distances invited robbery. Entire fortunes could disappear on a single journey. The Knights Templar offered a remarkable solution. A traveler could deposit money at a Templar commandery in one country and receive a written record of the deposit. After traveling hundreds or even thousands of miles, that same document could be presented at another Templar commandery, where the funds could be withdrawn safely. For the first time in history, people could move wealth across continents without physically carrying it. To modern eyes, it resembles a bank transfer. To medieval Europe, it was nothing short of revolutionary. The reputation of the Templars grew rapidly because trust was their greatest asset. Unlike many feudal lords, the order answered directly to the Pope rather than to local rulers. This independence gave merchants, nobles, and even monarchs confidence that their wealth would be protected. Templar treasuries became secure places to store valuables, legal documents, royal jewels, and enormous sums of money. Soon, some of Europe's most powerful rulers were borrowing from the very brotherhood they had once supported only as holy warriors. Financing military campaigns, castles, diplomatic missions, and royal administrations required vast resources, and the Templars possessed them. The order's financial influence became so significant that many historians consider it one of the earliest international banking institutions in European history. Yet immense wealth always attracts attention. As the Templars prospered, whispers began spreading through royal courts. Some nobles questioned how an order that had taken vows of poverty had become one of the richest organizations in Christendom. Others admired their discipline but quietly envied their influence. Every new donation, every successful business venture, and every castle added to their growing empire increased both their power and the resentment directed toward them. Then, in France, a young king watched all of this unfold. His kingdom was struggling under enormous financial pressure. Expensive wars, political conflicts, the cost of governing a powerful realm had drained the royal treasury. Again and again, the French crown turned to the Knights Templar for financial support. The order became not only the guardian of the kingdom's wealth, but also one of its largest creditors. For years, the arrangement worked. But debt has a dangerous way of changing relationships. A king who once relied upon the Templars slowly began to see them not as loyal allies, but as obstacles standing between him and absolute power. That king was Philip IV of France. His next decision would not simply change the future of the Knights Templar. It would become one of the most controversial acts in medieval history. King Philip IV had borrowed millions in today's value from the Knights Templar, but instead of repaying his debts, he devised a plan that would shock all of Europe, a plan so ruthless that it would erase one of history's most powerful brotherhoods in a single night. By the beginning of the 14th century, King Philip IV of France ruled one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. To his people, he appeared confident, intelligent, and deeply devoted to strengthening the French crown. But behind the walls of his magnificent palaces, the king faced a crisis few could imagine. Years of costly wars against England and Flanders had nearly emptied the royal treasury. Maintaining castles, paying soldiers, funding government officials, and defending France demanded enormous sums of money. The kingdom was spending far more than it could collect in taxes. Desperate for financial support, Philip repeatedly borrowed from the wealthiest institution in Europe, the Knights Templar. At first, the arrangement seemed practical. The Templars possessed vast financial resources, and lending money to Christian rulers appeared consistent with their mission of protecting Christendom. But as the years passed, Philip's debts continued to grow. Every loan increased the crown's dependence on the order, while every missed repayment strengthened the Templars' influence. For a proud medieval king, this was more than a financial problem. It was an insult. How could the ruler of France owe so much to an organization that technically answered not to him, but directly to the Pope? The more Philip considered the situation, the more dangerous the Knights Templar appeared. They owned castles throughout Europe, managed immense wealth, and operated independently of royal authority. Their commanders answered only to their Grand Master, and ultimately to the Pope himself. No king could simply seize their property or control their decisions. To Philip, this independence became intolerable. But there was another obstacle standing in his way. The head of the Catholic Church, Pope Clement V, had only recently taken office, and his relationship with the French king was complicated. Although the Pope held spiritual authority over Christendom, Philip's political influence was impossible to ignore. Historians continue to debate how much pressure the king placed upon the papacy, but there is little doubt that Philip sought the Pope's cooperation in dealing with the Templars. If the order could not be defeated on the battlefield, perhaps it could be destroyed in the courtroom. Rumors began spreading across France. Anonymous accusations claimed that secret ceremonies inside the order involved heresy, blasphemy, and other shocking offenses. Some alleged that new members were forced to deny Christ during their initiation. Others claimed they worshipped mysterious idols or practiced forbidden rituals behind closed doors. Modern historians caution that many of these accusations emerged under extraordinary political circumstances and were often supported by confessions obtained during imprisonment and torture. Even today, no reliable historical evidence has confirmed the more sensational claims, but facts mattered less than fear. The rumors spread quickly through churches, marketplaces, and royal courts. Ordinary people who had once admired the Knights Templar now whispered about dark secrets hidden behind monastery walls. Suspicion replaced respect, and uncertainty became a powerful weapon. While Europe debated whether the accusations were true, King Philip had already made his decision. He would not negotiate, he would not forgive the debts, he would eliminate the order completely. And to succeed, every arrest would have to happen at the same moment, without warning, without mercy. Across the entire Kingdom of France, royal messengers rode through France carrying sealed letters that no one was allowed to open. The orders inside were simple. Do not break the seal until dawn on Friday. October 13, 1307, when the sun finally rose, one of history's greatest betrayals began. For weeks, royal messengers rode across France carrying sealed letters stamped with the king's official seal. The instructions were unlike anything the kingdom had ever seen. Every governor, sheriff, and military commander received the same order, but none were allowed to open it immediately. Instead, they were instructed to wait until the early hours of Friday, October 13, 1307. Absolute secrecy was essential. If even a single Templar learned what was coming, the entire operation could fail. As darkness covered France on the evening of October 12, the Knights Templar retired for the night, unaware that history was about to change forever. Inside their commanderies, life continued as it always had. Some brothers gathered for evening prayers, others inspected horses and equipment, while many simply prepared to rest after another ordinary day. There was no sign that thousands of royal soldiers were quietly taking their positions outside Templar properties across the kingdom. Then, before sunrise, the seals were broken. Across France, commanders read the king's orders at almost the same moment. They were instructed to arrest every Knight Templar they could find, seize all Templar property, confiscate every document, and prevent anyone from escaping. There would be no warnings, no negotiations, and no opportunity to organize a defense. Within hours, royal troops stormed Templar houses from Paris to the countryside. Doors were forced open, chapels were searched, storehouses were sealed. Knights who had spent their lives defending Christendom were awakened by armed soldiers demanding their surrender. Many were taken into custody without resistance, believing the misunderstanding would soon be resolved. After all, they had faithfully served both the Church and Christian kings for generations. But this was no misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned operation designed to destroy the order before it could respond. Among those arrested was the Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay. Having recently attended the funeral of the French king's sister, he had remained in Paris, completely unaware that he had walked directly into Philip's trap. The most powerful leader of the Knights Templar was now a prisoner of the very monarch his order had supported for decades. News of the arrests spread across Europe with astonishing speed. Many rulers were shocked. Some refused to believe the accusations against the Templars, while others waited to see how the Pope would respond. After all, the Knights Templar answered directly to the Holy See. Could a king truly destroy an order protected by the Church? King Philip intended to make sure no one questioned his actions. Soon after the arrests, formal accusations were announced. The Templars were charged with heresy, blasphemy, and other serious religious crimes. According to the royal government, members of the order had secretly abandoned the very faith they claimed to defend. These allegations spread fear throughout Europe, even though many contemporary observers questioned their credibility. Modern historians note that much of the evidence presented against the Templars came from confessions obtained, while prisoners were held under harsh conditions, including torture. As a result, historians continue to debate the reliability of many of these statements. What remains beyond dispute, however, is that the arrests marked the beginning of one of the greatest political trials in medieval history. Inside cold prison cells, the once proud warrior monks now faced a terrible choice: remain silent or confess to crimes they insisted they had never committed. For many, the nightmare was only beginning. Behind locked prison doors, the torture began. One by one, the strongest warriors in Europe were pushed beyond the limits of human endurance, and soon, even the Grand Master himself would face an impossible decision. Next chapter: Confessions written in pain. Inside the cold stone prisons of medieval France, the Knights Templar found themselves trapped in a nightmare they could never have imagined. Only days earlier, they had been respected warriors, trusted by kings, admired by pilgrims, and honored by the Church. Now they were prisoners, isolated from one another, stripped of their armor, and accused of crimes that carried the ultimate punishment. The brotherhood that had stood united on countless battlefields was suddenly scattered across dark prison cells, unable to speak to one another or even know who remained alive. King Philip understood that accusations alone would not convince Europe. He needed evidence. More importantly, he needed confessions. But many of the imprisoned Templars refused to admit guilt. They insisted they had remained faithful to their vows, loyal to the Church, and innocent of every charge brought against them. When voluntary confessions failed to appear, the interrogations became far more severe. Medieval judicial practices often permitted the use of torture in certain investigations involving heresy, and the trials of the Templars were no exception. Contemporary records describe prisoners being placed under extreme physical and psychological pressure. Some endured days without sleep. Others were stretched on the rack until their joints dislocated. many faced unbearable suffering that pushed the limits of human endurance. Modern historians emphasize that confessions obtained under such conditions cannot be considered reliable evidence, yet at the time they became the foundation of the case against the order. One after another, exhausted prisoners began signing statements prepared by their interrogators. Some admitted to crimes they later denied. Others confessed simply to end the pain. A few refused until the very end, accepting further suffering rather than speak words they believed were false. Across France, the royal government presented these confessions as proof that the Knights Templar had secretly betrayed Christianity. For King Philip, the strategy was working. Public opinion slowly began to change. Many ordinary people who had once admired the Templars now questioned whether the rumors could be true. If so many brothers had confessed, surely there must be some truth behind the accusations, or so it seemed. Few outside the prison walls knew the circumstances under which those statements had been obtained. At the center of the storm stood Jacques de Molay, the final Grand Master of the Knights Templar. After decades of leading one of the most respected military orders in Europe, he now sat alone in a prison cell, uncertain whether his order would survive another month. Like many of his fellow knights, he eventually signed a confession while imprisoned. But unlike many others, his story did not end there. As the months passed and the immediate pressure eased, Jacques de Molay began to reconsider what had happened. Standing before church officials, he made a decision that stunned everyone in the courtroom. He withdrew his confession. Calmly but firmly, he declared that the admissions had been made under unbearable pressure and that the order was innocent of the crimes it had been accused of committing. His words echoed through the hall, challenging not only the king's case but the entire political campaign that had brought the Templars to ruin. For King Philip, this was a disaster. If the Grand Master publicly denied his confession, others might follow. The carefully constructed case against the Knights Templar could begin to collapse. The French king had invested years in destroying the order. He could not allow its leader to reclaim the truth before all of Europe. From that moment forward, Jacques de Molay's fate was sealed. He would never again walk free, and before long, the sentence awaiting him would send shockwaves across the medieval world. On a small island in the river Seine, a wooden platform was built. A crowd gathered. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar was led forward in chains. No one expected his final words to become one of history's most famous and most mysterious curses. On the afternoon of March 18, 1314, a cold wind swept across the Île de la Cité, a small island in the heart of Paris. Crowds gathered along the banks of the River Seine, eager to witness the fate of the man who had once commanded the most powerful military order in Christendom. Wooden barriers surrounded a large platform where two towering stakes stood waiting. Soldiers kept the growing crowd at a distance, while priests quietly recited prayers. The execution had been carefully arranged to send a message to all of Europe. After nearly 7 years of imprisonment, interrogations, and endless trials, Jacques de Molay, the final Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was brought forward in heavy chains. Though weakened by years of captivity, he walked with remarkable dignity. Those who watched expected to see a broken old man pleading for mercy. Instead, they saw a leader who refused to surrender his honor. Moments earlier, church officials had expected Jacques de Molay to accept the verdict against him publicly. Instead, he did the unthinkable. Standing before the assembled judges, clergy, soldiers, and citizens of Paris, he withdrew every confession he had made while imprisoned. Calmly but firmly, he declared that the Knights Templar were innocent and that the accusations against the order were false. He insisted that any admissions of guilt had been made under unbearable pressure and should never have been accepted as the truth. His words stunned the crowd. For King Philip IV, this act was nothing less than open defiance. By rejecting his confession in public, Jacques de Molay challenged years of political effort designed to destroy the Templars forever. The punishment was immediate. The Grand Master was condemned as a relapsed heretic, a charge that carried only one sentence under medieval law: death by fire. As the executioners secured him to the wooden stake, witnesses later described Jacques de Molay as calm and composed. Flames slowly climbed around the platform while smoke rose into the evening sky. According to several medieval chroniclers, before the fire consumed him, the Grand Master called upon both King Philip IV and Pope Clement V to answer before God's judgment. Over the centuries, this story became known as the Curse of Jacques de Molay. Although historians continue to debate the exact words he spoke, the legend has endured for more than 700 years. What happened next only deepened the mystery. Just over a month after the execution, Pope Clement V died following a prolonged illness. Later that same year, King Philip IV also died unexpectedly after suffering injuries from a hunting accident. To many people living at the time, these deaths seemed too extraordinary to dismiss as coincidence. Rumors spread rapidly across Europe that the Grand Master's final words had come true. Whether the curse was real or merely a legend remains impossible to prove. But one fact cannot be disputed. With the death of Jacques de Molay, the Knights Templar had lost their final leader. The order that had once defended pilgrims, financed kings, and commanded castles across Europe had been broken, or so the world believed, because while the king could burn a man, he could not burn every secret the Templars had left behind, and somewhere beyond the reach of the French crown. The greatest mystery of all was only beginning. When French soldiers searched the Templar castles, they expected to find mountains of gold. Instead, many vaults were empty, their treasure had vanished, their ships had disappeared, and for more than 700 years, the world has asked the same question. Where did the Knights Templars' treasure go? When the Knights Templar were arrested across France in 1307, King Philip IV believed he had achieved more than a political victory. He expected to seize one of the greatest fortunes in medieval Europe. For decades, the order had accumulated wealth through donations, estates, trade, and financial services. Their castles were believed to contain gold, silver, priceless manuscripts, sacred relics, and official records connecting every major kingdom in Europe. Royal officials immediately began searching Templar commanderies throughout France. Every vault was opened, every storeroom was inspected, every document was carefully examined. But something was wrong. Many of the treasures the king expected to find simply were not there. Some commanderies contained ordinary supplies, religious objects, and financial records. Yet the enormous fortune that rumor had promised was nowhere to be found. Historians believe much of the order's wealth existed not as piles of gold but as land, buildings, farms, and financial assets spread across Europe. Even so, the absence of certain valuables gave birth to one of history's greatest mysteries. Had the Knights Templar anticipated the arrests? Some historians point to accounts suggesting that, shortly before the arrests, a number of wagons quietly left Paris under Templar supervision. Other stories claim that a small fleet of Templar ships departed from the French port of La Rochelle, one of the order's most important harbors. What happened to those ships has never been conclusively established. Contemporary records are limited, leaving historians unable to confirm exactly where they sailed or what they carried. Over the centuries, countless theories have emerged. Some believe the treasure was hidden somewhere in France, buried beneath forgotten castles or remote monasteries. Others argue that surviving Templars escaped to Scotland, where they may have found protection during a time of political conflict between Scotland and England. Legends even suggest that Templar knights fought alongside Scottish forces at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Though convincing historical evidence remains elusive, another theory points toward Portugal. Unlike the French crown, the Portuguese crown did not aggressively persecute the Templars. Instead, many former members were absorbed into a newly created military order known as the Order of Christ, established with papal approval. This transition allowed many Templar properties and traditions to continue under a different name. Some historians see this as evidence that at least part of the order's legacy survived rather than disappearing completely. Then there are the more famous legends. For centuries, writers and storytellers have connected the Knights Templar to the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and other sacred relics. Some claim the Templars discovered hidden knowledge beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and secretly transported it to Europe. Others believe they uncovered documents capable of challenging the political or religious foundations of medieval society. These stories have inspired novels, films, and conspiracy theories around the world. Yet despite their popularity, historians have found no reliable evidence proving that the Templars ever possessed the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or other legendary artifacts. Such ideas remain part of folklore rather than established history. What we do know is this: the Knights Templar disappeared, their Grand Master was executed, their order was dissolved, but many of the questions surrounding their wealth, their documents, and their final movements remain unanswered. More than 7 centuries later, archaeologists, historians, and treasure hunters continue searching for clues. Perhaps the greatest treasure the Templars left behind was not gold at all, but a mystery that has survived every king, every empire, and every generation since, the Knights Templar vanished. But their influence did not. Their symbols still appear across Europe, their legacy lives on in history, and their story continues to inspire books, films, and endless debate. Next chapter, the legacy that refused to die. On March 22, 1312, nearly 2 years before the execution of Jacques de Molay, Pope Clement V officially dissolved the Knights Templar through the papal decree Vox in Excelso. After almost 2 centuries of service, one of the most powerful military and religious orders in medieval Europe was erased, not through defeat on the battlefield, but through politics, fear, and royal ambition. Their castles changed owners, their lands were redistributed. Many of their surviving members quietly disappeared into other religious or military orders. On paper, the Knights Templar no longer existed, but history has a remarkable way of preserving what power tries to erase. Across Europe, magnificent Templar castles still stand on windswept hills. Their churches continue to welcome visitors centuries after the last night walk through their doors. Ancient stone carvings bearing the famous Red Cross survive on weathered walls, silently reminding the world that the Order was once one of the greatest forces of the Middle Ages. Historians today agree that the Knights Templar transformed medieval Europe in ways that extended far beyond the Crusades. They developed one of the earliest international financial networks, introduced systems that made long-distance travel safer for merchants and pilgrims, managed vast estates with remarkable efficiency, and created an organization whose discipline became a model for later military orders. Yet, despite these achievements, it is not their victories that people remember most. It is the mystery. What really happened beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? Did the Order uncover something that has never been revealed? Were all the accusations against them politically motivated? Or did some secrets truly disappear with the last generation of Templars? These questions have inspired centuries of debate. Novelists imagined hidden treasures, filmmakers created thrilling adventures, accurate societies claimed to inherit Templar traditions, legends connected them to lost relics, forgotten knowledge, and hidden maps buried beneath castles and cathedrals. Most of these stories remain unproven, but perhaps that is exactly why the Knights Templar continue to fascinate the world. History usually gives us clear endings. Empires rise, kings fall, wars are won. But the story of the Knights Templar refuses to end so neatly. The records are incomplete. The treasure remains missing. The legends continue to grow. And every generation returns to the same unanswered questions. Perhaps the greatest power the Templars ever possessed was not their wealth, nor their armies, nor even their influence over kings. Perhaps their greatest power was leaving behind a mystery so compelling that, more than 700 years later, the world is still searching for the truth. So, were the Knights Templar faithful warrior monks who became victims of politics? Or was there something they knew, something so valuable, that powerful men believed it had to disappear forever? The answer may still be waiting, hidden somewhere in the pages of history. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history of the Knights Templar, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more untold stories from history's greatest civilizations, forgotten empires, legendary rulers, and enduring mysteries. Every week we explore the events that shaped our world and the secrets that history almost erased. Until next time, keep questioning history, because sometimes the greatest mystery is the one we've been told is already solved.